Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. We tend to think of meditation in a very constrained or limited way. The idea that we generally have of meditation is when you're sitting down cross-legged with your eyes shut, that's meditation, and everything else is not meditation. We need to correct that attitude, open up our mind to meditation as simply a focused exercise where we make the conditions optimal for achieving the kind of stillness and clarity and focus that we should be striving to develop all the time. There shouldn't really be a hard and fast border between time spent on the cushion and the rest of your life. The meditation, in a limited sense, what we think of as meditation, as the exercise in the sitting posture, is a kind of artificial exercise that we undertake to minimize external stimulus and create as close to ideal conditions for the inner work as we can. And it's essential that we do some of that if we're serious about making spiritual progress. We need to have those times of restrained inner work. But any kind of value gained from meditation is only of value if it extends to the rest of the life. The Pali words that are used that we translate as meditation are either, depending on context, it's either bhavana or jayati as a verb. Bhavana, or the verb would be bhaveti. Bhavana, broadly speaking, is development. It's becoming in one sense, but in another sense it's development, which is kind of deliberate becoming. Or cultivation is another word I've heard used in English that I rather like. With the agricultural metaphor of cultivation. You plant the seed and you tend it and water it, and you get results, you get a harvest. Bhavana, broadly speaking, is that part of the path. The path is sila, bhavana, and panya. Ethics, spiritual development, and wisdom. It's often given as those three. So with the foundation of sila, is ethics, is in a formal sense it's keeping the precepts, but in an informal sense it's living wholesomely and decently, honestly, and non-harming way. That's the foundation stone. Nothing can be accomplished without that. And then bhavana, taking it a step further, is the cultivation of wholesome mental states. cultivation of peacefulness, of wakefulness, of clarity, of energy. And it culminates in wisdom, the clear seeing, that understanding things as they actually are, not otherwise, seeing things according to reality. The other Pali word, jayati, which would more particularly refer to meditation in the narrow sense, the formal practice, because it's a verbal form of jhana. So often when the Buddha talks about meditating, using the verb jayati, it's essentially saying doing jhana. And it's true that to develop those really focused states of stillness, of samadhi, that we call the jhanas, then the physical restraint of formal meditation, of sitting still with eyes shut, is necessary. Because with the development of jhana, when practicing samadhi meditation, or jayati, to do jhana, one needs to still the mind. One can't be overburdened with various stimulus and activities. One has to be very still, externally and internally. But developing vipassana, the other aspect of meditation, clear seeing, seeing things as they actually are, that can be done in all postures and in activity. This is very important to cultivate this mindfulness in daily life. Today we spent hours doing various projects, cleaning cabin, clearing weeds, stacking firewood. These are activities that occupy the body. The body goes through motions and performs tasks. And what's happening with the mind when we're doing various activities, tasks? In the Satipatthana Sutta, in the section on mindfulness directed towards the body, one of the body meditations is meditation in action. And there's a long list of routine daily actions that a monk would undertake: putting on the robe, walking on alms down, eating the food, even including going to the toilet. And in all these things, one should be mindful of the body. So whatever we're doing, being aware and mindful of doing it. So you're not stacking firewood while you're daydreaming about next year's vacation or something. When stacking wood, just stack wood. When sweeping the floor, just sweep the floor. One teaching that's very useful in this regard is the 4 Iddhipadas, the paths to success, or the paths to power. Iddhipada. Iddhi is used in another context, meaning psychic powers. Reading minds, walking on water, these kind of things are iddhis. But in a more general sense, it's skillful mastery. So it's that kind of power, the power over reality that comes with skillful mastery of activity. And pada is a path, walking. Literally, it's a foot. It's used figuratively to mean path, or in a metaphorical sense, you follow a path. So you say patipada is the path of practice. Iddhipada are the four mental qualities that lead to success or mastery in any task undertaken. Whether it's meditation and development of jhana, or it's stacking a pile of firewood, or writing a computer code, or whatever one's doing, the mastery is found with these four qualities, Iddhipada. Chitta is the mind, and it's given as the first Iddhipada. Chitta is knowing, the clear knowing, the mind, the subjective aspect. And in this context, it means that one's mind is occupied with the task, so we're conscious of what we're doing. Now, it's possible to do things in a robotic fashion, mechanically, or even to be daydreaming and having the mind not engaged. And the task is not going to be well done if the mind is not engaged as well as the body. And if the mind is engaged, it becomes a meditation in itself, just by that. The involvement of the mind in the action is the satipatthana of mindfulness of the body. And anything that's done consciously and with full awareness, wakefully, is going to be done better. It's going to be done more skillfully. The results are going to be better. It's well known that on work sites, most accidents happen near the end of the day, because people are tired, they're not mindful, they're already thinking about what they're going to do when they get home and off the job, so they fall off the ladder. They're not mindful of their action. And being mindful is being awake, it's being fully alive and engaged. And it's kind of a high in itself, just being fully present. I think that's why people take up dangerous sports like rock climbing, because it forces the person to be fully mindful, intensely involved, with mind and body engaged at every movement. And we should try and strive to have that level of engagement in what we're doing. This is engaging the chitta. This is mindfulness directed towards the body, so any task can become a meditation in this way. The next Iddhipada is chanda, which is desire or zeal. We have often a stumbling block with the language. We know that the second noble truth is desire is the root of suffering. So desire becomes problematic, and the English word desire is too broad. So you have sometimes the criticism of Buddhism coming from people who have a superficial understanding. They say, well, if you don't have any desire, then you're just going to be like an inert lump. You're not going to do anything. How could you possibly be motivated to do anything? You just be completely apathetic. But the desire in the second noble truth is tanha, and the desire in the Iddhipadas is chanda. There's two different words in Pali, and they have a different connotation. Tanha is literally means thirst. And in terms of the noble truth, it has a specific meaning. That tanha is craving or desire for sensual pleasure, for becoming and for not becoming. Bhava tanha and vibhava tanha. For coming into being and for passing out of being. And for pleasant sense experience. So this becomes the root or the engine, the motive engine for samsara, for coming into existence in the various realms of being. As long as sensual desire is present in the being, there's an impulse to be reborn into the sense desire world, as a human or a deva or a lower realm. When that is overcome, there still is a desire for being, which can lead to rebirth into the Brahma worlds. But in any case, there's a motive, an engine for becoming that has its root in tanha. Chanda is different. It's a broader kind of a term. It's a motivating energy. It's desire in that sense. Maybe enthusiasm would be a close approximation as a translation. And chanda is in itself, abstractly considered, is neutral. It's positive or negative depending on the object. One can have chanda for sense desires, then it becomes basically the same thing as tanha. But there's also something called Dhamma chanda, which is the desire, the zeal, or the enthusiasm for the Dhamma, for understanding, which is the highest form of chanda. So it's not true that we, following the Buddhist path, we should be apathetic and inert. We can be fired with this enthusiasm, this chanda, for spiritual unfolding, for awakening, for liberation. And in terms of the Iddhipadas, chanda is the application, the enthusiasm, the application of enthusiasm, or the unfolding of enthusiasm to the task at hand. There's a saying that one of my teachers used to use often, I find very useful in many circumstances, is if you can't get out of it, get into it. We come in this life, we many times come up against something we have to do, we don't want to do. Some task at hand or some duty to perform. And if the mind rebels against it, and you do it with great reluctance, and you're going to just suffer. It's going to be unpleasant, and it's not going to be done well. But if you try and put yourself into it, get into the task, try to find some enjoyment in it, some enthusiasm. So whatever you're doing, no matter how mundane, you can try and find some engagement with it. And notice if the mind is kicking and rebelling, and don't allow it. Don't follow that. So if you can rouse up this enthusiasm, this chanda, then the task will be more pleasant, and it'll be done more easily, and the results will be better. The third is virya. which is energy or effort. The Buddha said that the goal is to be attained by the energetic, not by the lazy. You know? And this applies to the highest goal of realizing nibbana, and it applies to any mundane goal we set ourselves. We can't get anything done without raising energy and doing it. Many times I think the biggest hurdle in this regard is faced at the onset of a task. Just to get started, you have to overcome a natural lethargy or inertia. So there's an old saying, well begun is half done. If you just get started on the task, then the energies already rouse and carry you forward. To a very great degree, energy is a self-feeding. It's kind of a positive feedback loop. If you make the effort, put in the effort, and overcome lethargy and expend energy, then this arouses more energy, becomes easier. You become more energetic, and becomes it feels like less effort being applied, even though one's quite energetic. The fourth and last of the Iddhipadas is Vimamsa, which is investigation. It's taking what I would call an intelligent curiosity to the activity at hand. So taking an interest, not performing the actions in a mechanical way, in a fixed rote way, but always being keenly observant. This is how masters of various skills become masters. They hone their skills by paying attention to their actions and the results of actions. This is very important. You see, if you put this much pressure in, you get this result. If you ease off a bit, you get that result, and you find the right point, the right balance. And you learn. This is learning by doing. You learn as you go by taking an interest in the actions and, very importantly, the results of actions. One example is if you're using a hand plane to plane wood, and you're trying to set the blade properly, you would pay attention to the shavings. Pick up the shaving and have a look at it. If it's thicker on one side than on the other, then the blade isn't straight, and you make a minute adjustment to the blade. This kind of thing applies to everything we do. You adjust your method as you go. And all these Iddhipadas, all four Iddhipadas, apply both to meditation and to mundane actions. In terms of meditation, it's particularly related to the attainment of jhana, that one requires to be well versed in the Iddhipadas to have that discipline of the mind. The chitta, the mind is engaged with the object. Chanda, that there's some enthusiasm, there's a zeal for practice. Virya, that there's energy and persistent energy. And this is also probably applies to mundane things as well, but particularly for meditation, the correct energy is like a persistent, steady energy, not short heroic bursts that then get burned out, but steady as she goes. And Vimamsa is taking an investigative interest in the process. So you learn by doing. This applies very much to meditation, that you adjust your technique and your posture and various skillful means for cleansing the mind. You develop your own toolkit as you go. There's only so much you can get from teachers and from books that can give you a rough general guide, and then you have to hone the skill by your own exploration. And these same principles apply to any kind of job or task, skill, art, that one undertakes. And you can use this consciously. If you're undertaking some task, run the checklist in your mind of the 4 Iddhipadas and try to activate them, engage them. And see if it doesn't make the job more pleasant and the results better. Like all the Buddha's teaching, it's ehipassiko, come and see, check it out. It's something you can verify for yourself. This is a very useful exploration. And we should not denigrate efforts put forth in various tasks. That it's not that sitting in samadhi is a higher or better use of time than stacking firewood. It's just different. There's a place and a time for both. In some spiritual traditions, make an important formal requirement in mastery of mundane skills. In the Sufi tradition, the usual way is for the master to be not only a spiritual master, but also a master of some craft, a carpenter or a cobbler or what have you. And when he takes on a student, he won't give the student any spiritual teachings until the student has mastered the craft first. That's the preparatory work. I've also heard that in Jewish Kabbalah tradition, the conservative or orthodox teaching of Kabbalah, I mean, nowadays it's sort of bastardized, but in the way it should be done, the old way was not to be taught at all until the person reaches age 40. So they've had some life experience and have some understanding of the mundane world first. Zen tradition too. They use various crafts or skills as teaching tools. Archery, for example, and calligraphy. Those are probably the two big ones that Zen people use. There's a book that I remember seeing that struck me very much. This making a very important point. It had a little section on Zen calligraphy, and it had a photograph, side by side, 2 photographs of a Japanese character that had been drawn, one by a master and one by an advanced student. And to look at the same character, and they look very similar, but to the eye, when you look at it, somehow the one by the master seems better. It's hard to put your finger on it. But then follows up with a magnified view of the end of one of the strokes, one of the brush strokes. And the one by the master ends absolutely crisp. It's like you cut something out with an X-Acto knife. And the one by the student, there's a little feathering at the end. It's not quite crisp. And the explanation is that the master is either making a stroke or not. He's making a stroke and then he's not. Whereas with the student, there's a moment, minuscule fraction of a second moment's hesitation when he's not quite decided whether to end the stroke or not. So there's a little fuzziness at the end. You know? Whereas the master is so clear in his own mind that he's either making the stroke or not. When the stroke's finished, then he's not making the stroke anymore. And this is the kind of level of mastery you learn a skill by doing. You know, and having that vimamsa, that investigation, you know, to understand. You know, the student would learn over time by closely examining his brush strokes, comparing it to the master's. When I was in the working world, I had one job where I had to do a lot of soldering, electronic soldering as part of the task of the job. And the company would run training seminars now and again, and they did one for soldering skills. And I thought I knew how to solder before I went on this course. I thought it was kind of a waste of time. But what they did was you solder things on a board, and then you look at it under a magnifying glass, like a very powerful, not just a magnifying glass, but like a binocular microscope. So you see that hugely expanded. And wow, you know, the first efforts, wow, does that look crappy? and then you gradually refine until you can get a very perfect, clean, even at a microscopic level. You know, this is very similar to that brushstroke thing. You're either soldering or you're not, right? You don't hesitate. That is a useful contemplation and an interesting paradox, that not doing is perhaps more difficult at times than doing. And to keep the distinction between the two crisp and clean is a high level of mastery. And when we undertake, another aspect of all this is, you know, when we undertake tasks as we did today, you know, selflessly spending our time doing tasks that, you know, you're stacking firewood and maybe you're not going to even be here to burn any of it. There's a selfless gift given to the universe. This is making karma. This is making merit. Karma means action, and it's the same root as to make or to do or to work. Karoti. This karma is action. And every action that we undertake with body, speech, or mind has a ripple effect on the universe. And our consciousness will at some future moment in this life or another life experience the result of karma. This is called vipaka. I think the best analogy for thinking about karma is to think of it as a natural law, somewhat akin to something like the law of conservation of momentum, or even better, something like conservation of angular momentum. These conservation laws in nature, physical laws, say that if you have a closed system and you change something in any part of the system, then the rest of the system will change to compensate. So there seems to be built into the fabric of reality a strong impulse to zero itself all the time. to balance everything out. So for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. It's one of Newton's laws. Whatever you do in a closed system will affect the rest of the system, and it will change to compensate, to bring things back to the same initial balance. And karma is like that. Whatever we do, we're changing the universe. We're putting a ripple out into the universe. So we should try and see that what we do is positive and wholesome and tends to the reduction of suffering and not the increase of suffering. There's a term that's used in some Hindu circles as karma yoga. It's one of the forms of yoga. Yoga is the same root as yoke. It's like a discipline, a binding. This hatha yoga is the exercise of the body in postures, right? And there's other kinds of yoga, and karma yoga is making karma in a disciplined way, and it's basically selfless work done not for personal gain but to benefit others. This is karma yoga. And this has a place in the Buddhist tradition too. In the Jataka stories, it's often the case that the beings that take birth as heavenly beings, devas and so on, attain to that state through meritorious deeds done as a human being. Sakka, the king of the 33 gods, the Tawatingsa gods, in his last human existence, was the leader of a band of 33 companions that had set themselves that they would do good works in terms of clearing roads, like infrastructure kind of, we would call it, things like clearing roads and building water tanks and building salas for visitors, travelers. And this was their, service to the community. Because they didn't expect any reward for it. They were just doing it out of generosity and good-heartedness. And they became Sakka and the 33 gods because of the merit made. One of the most intriguing stories involving karma that I've come across is from the Asoka Vedana, which is a Sarvastivadana text in Sanskrit. It's an early Buddhist text about King Asoka. King Asoka was the Buddhist king of all of India, and he's often remembered fondly as the ideal kind of ruler. And it said that at the time of, this story says that at the time of the Buddha, he was a poor street urchin in Magadha, this raggedy kid in the street. And the Buddha and his monks were walking down the street on alms round, and this little kid saw the adults putting rice in the bowl of the monks, and he became overcome with faith and he wanted to participate in this, but he had nothing at hand to give the monks. He had no food or rice. So he made a little pie out of mud that he got from the road, and he put it in the bowl, in the Buddha's bowl. And Ananda, the Buddha's attendant walking behind, became very upset. This little raggedy kid, he put mud in your bowl. And Ananda was very good-hearted and very kind, but he often, in these stories, he gets the wrong end of the stick. The Buddha chastises him and says, "Say not so, Ananda, say not so. That gift of earth given by this child in good faith, this little handful of earth shall become the whole of Jambudipa." meaning the whole of India. But then there's another twist to the story too, because it goes on later in the story, some chapters later, when he's reborn as Asoka, and now he's the Lord and Emperor of all India. And you have to understand too, to the ancient Indian imagination, India was the world, right? This handful of dirt became the whole earth, right? All the other countries round about, they're just barbarians, they don't count. India was the world. So for giving that gift in good faith, he became the ruler of the world, but because he besmirched the Buddha's bowl with mud, he was born very ugly. So this is a mixed karma result. Yeah. And another point of these kind of stories is that small actions can have big results. And this is a point that comes up again and again in the Vimanawatu stories. The Vimanawatu is a book of stories about beings born into the heaven worlds, the devas, and it's Moggallana. Usually the story has the same kind of format. Moggallana is visiting the heaven world, and he sees this Deva has this palace all covered with beautiful ponds of lotuses, and there's lotuses draping on the walls, and lotuses everywhere, and smells wonderful, looks beautiful. And he asks, well, how come you have all these? Where is the merit from? How did you generate the merit to have this palace full of lotuses? And the Deva says, when I was a human being, I gave a lotus to a Pacceka Buddha. So this kind of simple gestures can have, if they're done with earnest goodwill and sincerity, small actions can have big results. And that for every karma that we make, for good or for ill, there is a fruit and a burden to it. Will come back.
And Damayam Damakataya Sadhu Karam Daramase Sadhu 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 Manudami.